Now, we've talked a lot about wind energy, as the Prime Minister has talked about us becoming the Saudi Arabia of wind. Looking at some figures, I said last week on this programme that a great big anticyclone, a great big high pressure, was sitting over much of the United Kingdom. And last week, on March the 25th at 9 a.m, wind was producing 2% of our energy. On Monday this week at 9 a.m, it was producing 0.5%, and for the entirety of last week, it produced 3%. And that, of course, is the problem with wind. The more wind turbines you build, the more you rely on them, the weaker your energy security and the more you need to use gas. But there is a growing level of resistance and opposition on the Conservative backbenches, amongst commentators, in the press, and one or two campaigns that are out there running too. And it was interesting today to see that Quadrilla have been told they don't need to concrete up the two wells that they'd sunk in the northwest of England, the shale gas wells. And I wonder whether, is this an outbreak of common sense? I certainly hope so. Well, joining me to discuss all of this is somebody that may take a slightly different view. It's Tom Burke, co-founder of the climate change think tank E3G. Tom, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Nice to see you again.
I'm all for renewable energy, provided it's not subsidised by the taxpayer, and provided it gives us a degree of security of supply. I mean, you have to admit, surely, that wind energy last week did let us down very badly.
There was very little wind last week. It's absolutely true. You're quite right about that. By the way, the lights stayed on. Electricity still worked. Every factory was running. Everybody's home was still heated. So it didn't matter all that much. And that's because actually we have a very sophisticated grid that can cope with that. And what's more, we can predict when the wind isn't going to blow and take measures to make sure that we keep the power on, which is not quite the same as the French are able to do with their nuclear power stations going offline. About 16 of them are offline at the moment, unpredictably, which incidentally puts the price of gas up here because they have to use gas to substitute for their nuclear that doesn't work. So
well, we have to use a lot of gas for wind. We have to use, Tom, a lot of gas too. We use a lot of gas too when the wind doesn't blow. But the other point about wind power is it has, over the last couple of decades, substantially increased people's electricity bills. Is it reasonable for ordinary folk? Is it reasonable?
No, I don't think you're right about that, Nigel. I don't think it's done that. Right at the beginning of when we started to try and bring wind on 10, 15 years ago, then it cost us a lot more. Right now, wind is providing cheaper electricity to the grid than gas or coal or indeed nuclear. So, I mean, it's not actually putting people's bills up. It's bringing them down.
I have to say the 25% surcharge on everyone's electricity bill is a part of that package, and I don't like it. But Tom,
wait. There is a charge on every generator for the grid, which distributes electricity, whatever the source. So every source pays a fee, if you like, in order to get access to the grid. Wind pays it, solar pays it, so does gas, so does coal, so does nuclear. That's just so you can't just pick one figure out and bang it in at somebody. You've got to look at how the whole system works.
Well, they are called.
Works that way.
This 25% are called renewable and social obligations. But let's move on to another issue. And that is, Quadrilla had sunk these two wells in the northwest of England. And it did seem at a moment when energy, there is a global energy crisis and rising prices and people's rising bills, it did seem to me to be completely madness to fill them up with concrete. Is this at least, and I know that you want as low a carbon future as possible, and I get that, and I understand that, but we are going to be using gas for many, many, many years to come. Is the fact Quadrilla have been told not to fill these wells up with concrete, is that actually a common sense thing in your view?
No, it's not. And I'll tell you why. Because I think as important as driving carbon out of the economy is keeping bills down. If we don't keep bills down and to the lowest possible level, then we won't be able to drive carbon out of the economy because we won't have the public support to do that. Fracking I mean, what's really revealing about fracking is the economic ignorance of a large number of Conservative MPs who don't seem to understand that if you produce gas in this country, you sell it at the price it goes for in the global market. So whether we produce it from fracking or anything else, producing our own gas won't actually make bills cheaper for people.
Well, it has in America. It has in America, Tom Burke. In fact, in America, where they have produced, certainly in Trump's time, they were producing a lot of their own gas, and they turned America around from being an energy importer to an exporter. But gas prices in America right now are 50% of what they are in the UK. So actually, with government getting involved in this, we could give people cheaper energy. But surely, Tom, surely there's one point we will agree on. Doesn't it make sense for us to be energy, whatever source, but doesn't it make sense for us to be energy independent?
I completely agree with you that the right thing to do is to take ourselves out of the trade in energy commodity markets. Completely agree with you about that. And the best way to do that is to get the government to spend the $9 billion it promised in its election manifesto on improving energy efficiency in people's homes, and not doing what it's done, which is actually give the money to a bunch of American consultants who managed to mess it up and wreck the project. So let's spend the money on the thing that will actually help get bills down. I think that's a very good idea. So I agree with you about the idea of reducing our vulnerability to trade in global commodities.
And final
we also
thought,
agree about nuclear, by the way, Nigel, as I remember from the last time we talked.
Final thought, Tom. If you were in charge, you would fill up those 2 wells in Lancashire with concrete, yeah?
Yeah, they're not going to help us with the current problem because it's going to take us 10 years to turn those wells into something that could generate any gas anyway. So I'm not worried about that right now.
All right, Tom, thank you very much indeed. And there you are, viewers. I disagree with all of that, but we do disagree in an open and civil way.